Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
We're going to take you to central London, where the Russian ambassador is speaking. Let's have a listen in.
The British authorities refused to provide samples of the chemical substance. The legitimate consular access to the Russian citizens under the 1963 Vienna Convention and the consular relations have not been granted. The only response we received from the British authorities was a note verbal about medical condition of Yulia Skripal. It didn't go further than the official public statements, according to which she was reportedly critically ill, but in a stable condition. The Foreign Office refused to share information on Sergei Skripal, stating that he is the British citizenship. Therefore, the British government has violated its obligations under the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations by denying consular access for the embassy to the Russian citizens. We continue to insist that the access and full information on the condition of our compatriots, whom nobody has seen since 4th of March, should be provided. On 12 March, 8 days after the day of poisoning, I was summoned by Foreign Secretary Johnson, who put forward a 24-hour ultimatum to explain the Russian government's position by the end of the next day. The question was put like that, the following: either the incident in Salisbury was a direct act of the Russian government against the UK, or the Russian government had lost control over a nerve agent that the Foreign Secretary identified as A234 and allowed it to get into the hands of the others. Next hour, Prime Minister May updated the House of Commons about the incident in Salisbury using the same words as Secretary Johnson did at our meeting, except that she introduced the term novichok, a bizarre Russian name to use with regards to the chemical substance, in a clear attempt to additionally and quite artificially link the incident to Russia. Next day, on the 13th of March, the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs gave a statement on the incident in Salisbury and strongly protested against evidence-free accusations and provocations by the British authorities. It was emphasized that Russia is not to be talked to in ultimatums, and that in any case we can only properly consider the matter after we receive samples of the chemical substance to which UK is referring to, and after the UK complies with the Chemical Weapons Convention that stipulates cooperation between state parties, for which Moscow is ready. Without that, there is no sense in the British statements. On 14th March, the Prime Minister gave another statement on the incident in Salisbury in the House of Commons, where she announced an expulsion of Russian diplomats and other hostile and provocative measures against Russia. She provided no proof of Russia's alleged involvement in the incident and made a conclusion that, as she put it, it was highly likely that Russia was responsible for it. Thus, the British government again built an official position, and I want to stress it, official position, on pure assumptions. The embassy again requested the British authorities to cooperate under the Chemical Weapon Convention on bilateral basis or through the OPCW Executive Council and share information and the samples of the toxic substance. Due to the pressure of the Russian side, the Prime Minister at last sent a letter to the Director General of the OPCW Technical Secretariat on the 14th of March and requested assistance in verifying British analysis. As I understand, the OPCW experts arrived to the UK this Monday. We don't know their mandate, but I hope they will follow all the necessary procedures and principles of the CWC, Chemical Weapon Convention, including ensuring a proper chain of custody of the samples, if there are any. They would also need to check how that was possible that the British authorities managed to designate the nerve agent used as so-called Novichok as its origin so quickly. Could it mean that it's highly likely that the British authorities already had this nerve agent in their chemical laboratory in Portdown, which is the largest secret military facility in the UK that has been dealing with the chemical weapons? Is it a coincidence that this chemical weapons facility is only 8 miles away from the site of the incident? How did doctors decide what antidotes to administer to the victims? Russian experts are puzzled how quickly the British authorities managed to designate the nerve agent allegedly used in Salisbury and how this correlates with Scotland Yard's official statements that, and I'm quoting, investigation is highly likely to take weeks or even months to arrive at conclusions. We are sure that the results of the Technical Secretariat Assistant Mission should be reported to the OPCW Executive Council. A few words about lack of cooperation from the British side. Instead of imposing 24-hour deadline, the UK could and should have referred to paragraph 2 of Article 9 of the Chemical Weapon Convention, which requires the state parties to make every effort to clarify and resolve through exchange of information and consultations any matter which they cause doubt about compliance with the convention. A state party which receives a request from another state party shall provide as soon as possible, but in any case not later than 10 days after the request, information sufficient to answer the doubt or concern. If they requested information from Russia on the 12th of March, they would have received it by 22nd March, that means today. The British side didn't send a request to Russia and is not willing to talk to the Russian representatives in Hague, where the OPCW Technical Secretariat is located. Instead, an anti-Russian campaign has been launched in the UK. To make the story short, Britain has, without any evidence, blamed Russia of poisoning of 3 people and continues to refuse to cooperate. We cannot accept that. There is another case which worries us very much. From the British media, and again, not from the British authorities, we have learned about the death of the Russian citizen Nikolai Glushkov. The embassy has also learned from the press that the police investigating Mr. Glushkov's death assumes that he could have died from compression of the neck, I'm quoting, suggesting he was strangled. In the full compliance with the 1963 Convention on Consular Relations, the embassy immediately requested by note verbal full information on the circumstances of the death of the Russian national and on the investigation, but has not received any meaningful response from the Foreign Office so far. Moreover, it seems that the British side is deliberately ignoring our requests and continues to avoid any contact with the embassy on that matter. To summarize what I have said before the Q&A session, I would like to say that the burden of proof lies within the British authorities. By now, no facts have been officially presented either to the OPCW or to us, or to the UK partners, or to the public. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot take British words for granted. The UK had a bad record of violating international law and misleading the international community, which include invading Yugoslavia, 78 days of bombing, Iraq and Libya under the false pretext, and supporting the coup d'etat in Ukraine. At the end, I would like to quote President Ronald Reagan, who frequently referred to the Russian proverb, "Trust but verify." History shows that Britain's statements must be verified. We demand full transparency of the investigation and full cooperation with Russia and the OPCW. So this is the end of my remarks, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Please.
Your Excellency, how would you comment on Boris Johnson's statement which he made yesterday comparing the World Cup in Russia to Olympic Games in Germany? And I personally find it very hurtful, as my family, as many Russian families, have lost all its men in this war.
I'm authorized to say that Moscow considers this kind of statements made under the level of the Foreign Secretary in any way unacceptable and totally irresponsible. The British government is free to make a decision about its participation in the World Cup, but nobody has the right to insult the Russian people who defeated Nazism and lost more than 25 million people by comparing our country to Nazi Germany. That goes beyond the common sense, and we do not think British war veterans, including those of the Arctic convoys, would share this opinion. Starting from the front line.
Your Excellency, yesterday, Mr. Johnson as well raised concern of the UK regarding the safety of the funds during the World Cup, the England funds. How would you reassure the UK regarding that?
Well, I'm going. First of all, I'll be happy to invite all the fans. They will be safe in Russia. All the necessary measures are being taken, and the British special authorities are in contact with the Russian special authorities to provide the security of the fans and all the British who will be in the territory of Russia. It's not about the Britain, it's just the regular precautions that we're doing with every single country and every single, let's say, federation who are going to participate in this World Cup games. So I'm sure that there will be full security, and by the way, there will be a visa-free regime for those who are going to come to Moscow. If they have a ticket, they are not entitled just to the visa, let's say, applying. So they will be the guests of Russia.
Nick Robertson from CNN. So when do you anticipate the Russian...
Could you take the microphone, because you know it's, some people will be happy to enjoy, you know, the louder voice.
If people enjoy me, so
I'm quite sure.
Happy with that. Nick Robertson from CNN. So when do you anticipate the Russian government will respond to that British question of was this a state act, or was it somehow the snobby chocolate out of the hands of state institutions? This has, of course, been echoed now. We've heard by members of the European Union, the United States as well. When will Russia answer that question?
We answered to this question the next day, as soon as we'll get the note. As I said, I was summoned to the Foreign Secretary, by the Foreign Secretary, and the next day we said the official note from the embassy that Russia has nothing to do with this incident. That was clearly stated in official level. Then it was repeated for the public by the statement, the same day, by the statement of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I am just putting the question, you know, what kind of other answers we need once it was officially stated. There is another question that is really bothers me. It's that we don't have any access to the investigation. We were blamed that Russia did it, and we want to know what's behind that, and we're happy to investigate together, because this is the Russian citizens. But so far, we don't have any cooperation with the UK on that matter, and it really puzzles us. Why? We'll just go like that. You know, I'll answer all the questions, please.
Rohit Katru from ITV News. On Sunday, the embassy tweeted, "We definitely need Poirot in Salisbury!" Explanation mark.
Did you like it?
Well, my question is for you. Is this a joke? Are you treating this seriously?
Well, of course, it's, the message was very simple. We don't have any information. The investigation is classified, and we don't know the motivation of the British government. And that's why, since this case is so complicated, we need, you know, let's say some wisdom from the person like Poirot to investigate the matter. That was the message. That's it. Nothing special behind that.
But surely that's not the right tone. Are you not treating this flippantly?
Listen, we're not going to talk about the tone, because, you know, Twitter has so many, even the British humor, and if you can say that we're putting something from the British newspapers, you can ask me, you know, whether it's the right tone. I mean, it's not just the political statement. This is also for the public, and they like it. I'm sorry. Too much time. You know, we have. Please. No, the lady in front.
Deborah Haynes from The Times. Theresa May is going to be urging her current EU counterparts to follow suit with the British expulsion of 23 diplomats and to expel Russian diplomats themselves. What would Russia do if that happens? And a second question, if I may. I find your sort of indignation about British violations of the Vienna Conventions a bit strange when your president has publicly stated that any traitor of Russia deserves to die. Thank you.
As far as the Theresa May, let's say, activity in the EU, I spoke to several, let's say, EU ambassadors yesterday, and I asked them whether they received any evidence from Britain, and they said no. So basically, I think all the countries of the EU will be happy to see something before they make the conclusions. And what I was told by one ambassador yesterday, he said, first we want to see the evidence, then to make conclusions. So this is the answer. As far as the statement of my president, that was said in the absolutely different context, and it has nothing to do with Britain. The second row. Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much. John Sweeney, last week at BBC Panorama, this week BBC Newsnight. Sir, your president, Vladimir Putin, has said that the idea that Russia poisoned these three people in Salisbury is unimaginable. I want to ask you about what happens...
Could you say it a little louder?
Okay, yeah.
I appreciate that.
Sorry. Your president, there's a problem, I think, with this. Your president, Vladimir Putin, has said that the poisonings in Salisbury, that Russia's responsible, that's unimaginable. Let me put to you what's happened to a number of people who are openly critical of Vladimir Putin. Anna Politkovskaya was poisoned, then shot. Who? Anna Politkovskaya. Second, Alexander Litvinenko, a traitor in the president's view, poisoned. Boris Nemtsov, shot. With that track record, sir, how reliable is the word of Vladimir Putin?
I think the word is very reliable because, let me just point out to one simple fact. You mentioned Litvinenko, but you didn't mention Berezovsky, who died here. You didn't mention Perepelichny, who died here in London recently. And of course, I mentioned Glushkov, who died. What is the common, let's say, fact around that?
They're all critics of Vladimir Putin.
And all the investigations were classified. We didn't have access to any investigation, any papers, and all the materials. So my question, in this country, the people who were linked to the secret services, and we know that Litvinenko worked for the secret services, Berezovsky cooperated with the secret services, Perepelichny, I don't know whether he was an agent or not, and the other guy, Glushkov, we still have to understand that. All of them died, and all of them, the whole investigation information and all the papers were classified and still classified.
What about Nemtsov, sir?
Nemtsov, by the way, compared to the Nemtsov, the investigation was done and the people were punished. It's the same story as Politkovskaya, the journalist. If you read let's say, the decisions of the court, all the people were punished. And this is a big difference. And in our case, the investigation and the court was open. In the case of Britain, everything is classified. We still don't have any access to these papers. And my question is why? Because there should be something that somebody here is trying to hide from us, and not just from us, but also from the British public opinion.
Could you list the number of British opposition figures who have been poisoned and shot in the last decade?
I'm not going to talk about this. This is the internal matter of the Britain. But what I want to say, But what I want to say is that there are 43 Russian criminals are on demand. They were asking to extradite them to Russia because they made a crime in Russia. So they're involved in the money laundering, in killers. And all these people got the residence permit here in the UK, and the Britain's refusing to extradite them to Russia. My question is why these people are threatening the public in this country, because they are criminals. And what is the policy of this government if they are trying to keep these people here in this country? So we don't accept the explanations about the human rights and the bad conditions in the Russian, let's say, jails. That's right. I'm sorry. We have so many people. You ask your question. No, I'm sorry. We can talk later. As soon as we finish with the others, I'll give you the floor. Please.
Larissa Brown from the Daily Mail. Do you think that Vladimir Putin deserves the prestige of hosting the World Cup in Russia, given the illegal annexation of Crimea and the bombing of innocent civilians in Syria, and the silencing of his critics? Thank you. And also, is the tournament going to be a propaganda victory for the Russian leader?
You mean the Cup?
Again, sorry, World Cup, yes.
You're trying to quote Boris Johnson, as I understand, but from the different angle, the second question. Am I right? No? You're not supporting Boris?
I'm sort of drawing on his comments.
Okay, you didn't read it, right? Okay. So the first question, the decision to host the World Cup is not just the decision of Russia. This is the decision of the world community. So this is the way how the world community thinks about Russia, not just Britain, but the world community, which is much bigger than one country. So this is the answer to your question. And whether it will be advertising, of course it will be advertising, because the competition will take place in 11 cities. We build absolutely fascinating infrastructure. We're going to host, how many people we're going to host from Britain? Something around 20,000 or maybe 30,000. The people are buying tickets, they're going, they will go to Russia. And if you take the other countries, there will be even more of them. Visa-free regime, new facilities, fascinating hotels. So we're hosting all these people. And so this will be, of course, this will be the advertising of the Russian standards of living. The country is growing very fast. And we're growing 2.5% a year. And before the elections, my President Putin said that Russia is going to grow even further. He wants to grow faster than the average world economic growth. So it's about 4%. So basically, we're confident, and we will be happy to welcome everybody. And as I said, it's the decision not of one country, but this is the decision of the world. Okay.
Ambassador James Robbins of BBC News. Can we be clear? Is Russia willing to absolutely condemn the Salisbury attack as a terrible crime? Can you be surprised that Britain is not involving Russia as a partner in the investigation when Britain, Theresa May, clearly regards Russia as the principal, if not perhaps the only suspect? It would be very odd, therefore, for you to be actively involved in the investigation.
Well, the only thing we want to have is the evidence. I mean, if you're a serious country, you have to back up your, let's say, allegation with some facts. So far, we didn't have any proofs of that. The only thing that we see, absolutely hysteric media campaign and a very strong statement on the side of the Prime Minister. But we will be happy to see the facts. And I'll tell you frankly that I'm surprised why the Britain is not going to cooperate with us, why Britain is refusing to cooperate with us. For me, it's a big question. Maybe you know the answer to that. I don't have it.
I invited you, sorry, to condemn the crime and for Russia to condemn the crime as a terrible act.
That's exactly what my president said, because we consider this is a terrible story, terrible act. This is the poisoning of the people. By the way, Russian people, you have to know that. And we have to investigate this case because, we want to know the truth. And so far, we didn't have any information or at least any wish to do something together. So for us, that's a big question.
Thank you. Vidya Ram from The Hindu. When it comes to the international response, we've seen a range of responses from some countries supporting the British line. We've seen others, China, India, adopt a much more cautious position, encouraging dialogue and action first. From your perspective, what do you think the way different countries have responded says about the current international order and state of international relations at the moment?
Well, we're in a very close, let's say, contacts, with all the countries of the world. And what really worries us is that the way how the international law is applied. Because this is, in order to keep the world stable, we believe that all the countries should follow the international law. And that's exactly what the India is doing, China is doing, Russia is doing, we're the leaders of that. And if you look at the deeds in the international arena, so we are trying to do that. So basically, in this case, let's say the BRICS countries, they have the same vision of the world, they see the same trends, And this is the new reality.
Your Excellency, one moment Boris Johnson is saying that he doesn't want a new Cold War and that Russia is not a threat. The next moment he's comparing Putin to Hitler. How do you deal with the contrasting nature of the statements? And also, more widely, what does it say about the state of your profession, diplomacy in general at the moment?
Well, in general, I'll tell you it's very difficult because we believe that the top diplomats should be very cautious with the language, because there are certain, let's say, political manners in this world, and it's very difficult for us because we're facing the new realities of the new diplomacy here in the UK. But we understand how it works. We understand what the people are thinking. I don't understand, let's say, I understand the policy of Britain. What really worries us is that the way how all this campaign is being presented, it's very anti-Russian. It really creates a serious problems for the UK itself, because after 2 weeks of this kind of really wild statements, how are you going, just to talk to the Russians? Because, as I said today, that was really very insulting to the Russian people. It's not about the government. We're talking about the people. So, but this is new realities here in the UK, and I think this will be the way how we had to deal with the British Foreign Service. It's difficult. Please, I'll give the answer to everybody.
Many Russian businessmen here in London say that they're facing serious pressure from the British authorities and receiving threats from the British media. Did they address the embassy somehow, and would you comment on that?
The Russian citizens, the business people, they addressed their problems, and we see more and more restrictions on their activity here in the UK. They are puzzled. Some of them are frightened. The only recommendation that we gave them is once you have a serious problems with certain things, you have to go to court and solve your problems in the court. This is one story. But we have another side of that, let's say, story, is the threats to the Russian journalists. That happened after the wild media campaign in an incident in Salisbury, and some of them are threatened physically. And in this case, let's say, we recommended them to work with the police, because from my point of view, the pressure, that kind of pressure to the media, is absolutely unacceptable. We raised this question in our organization of the Security and Cooperation in Europe, and they are now being involved with every single case, because this is the violation of the international law from the British side. And we, of course, alerted the Foreign Office. We sent an official note to the Foreign Office, and we are demanding the explanations. It looks like the microphone doesn't work, no?
Try.
Oh, okay. It works.
Deutsche Welle, German TV. You said earlier that the UK has given residence to serial killers. I think it might be with regard to extradition requests that you have from Russia. Could you name those, please?
Well, we have a Data Protection Information Act here in this country, so I can make it only privately to you, because it's the, let's say, bilateral matter. But if you want to have some, let's say, names, we could provide you as the background, because we're not allowed to say this publicly. That was a request from the British side. Sorry about that.
Ambassador Johnson, Channel 4 News. This week we have This week we have reported on the activities of Cambridge Analytica, and I have a rather nice photograph here of the former chief executive, Mr. Alexander Nix, receiving a prize from you at a polo match. The two of you look rather graceful. But can I ask you a serious question? In response to this, Hillary Clinton has told us that she believes Russian money was involved in the campaign in America. Are you able to confirm that you do have more than a passing relationship with Cambridge Analytica, and it may extend to the involvement in other people's elections?
Well, I'll give you the story. You know, I'm here 7 years, and I met thousands of people. If you look at our website. Yeah, that's right, that's right. No, it's all right, it's all right. One day I was invited to the Windsor Club, and the main prize was the Russian vodka, Ivan the Terrible. And the organizers asked me, since this is the Russian vodka, which is available in the UK, why don't you give the prize to all the, let's say, members of the team who just got the prize? So what I did, I gave the prize maybe 10 people, 12 people, and that was the only time that I met this gentleman. And there were at least 10 of them. I simply don't remember them. I'm quite sure that, you know, the high officials, sometimes when they're participating in the very profound clubs like Windsor Club, you know, and handling, you know, giving these prizes, I'm not so sure that they remember all of them. So basically, but the picture is good. I like it.
What about the wider relationship with Cambridge Analytica?
We didn't have any contacts with the Cambridge Analytica, and I'll tell you that I only read, let's say, the official reports which were published in the British media. And what I can say, you know, we didn't have any connections, we didn't meet with anybody, and that was the only time when I met this gentleman in a Windsor polo club. Sorry about that. Please.
Bari Alamuddin. Ambassador, it seems to me this is a dialogue of the deaf between Russia and Britain. And I don't exactly know what is this going to do to international problems like Syria, like Yemen, when you come all together to discuss, especially knowing what leading role Russia plays in these conflicts. Thank you.
Of course, you know, it's, I mean, Britain is the permanent member of the UN Security Council. And we have very close day-to-day contacts on the Syrian matter, the Middle East, because my job is to explain the Russian position and to explain this in details. And we're using all the levels. And of course, you know, every time when I have an opportunity, I'm talking directly to Boris Johnson and explaining, you know, what we're going to do. The last time we met on that matter, that was about Eastern Ghouta. And today, of course, we know that in Eastern Ghouta, something like, if the memory serves me, something like 80,000 people were released. We provided Eastern Ghouta with 30,000 tons of the humanitarian aid. And even the armed people are leaving Eastern Ghouta. But my request to the British government was very simple. Could they do something? Could Boris Johnson do something if they have any influence on those who are armed in Eastern Ghouta to urge them to lay down the weapons, stop killing the civilians, stop using them as the life shield, do something to save lives. Then I referred to him, you know, a few days later, and I asked, well, did you do something? So actually I was hinted that basically not. But still we have to talk to the British side because we definitely know that they have links with the armed, let's say, opposition. And if you look at the activity of the white helmets, you will find that this so-called NGO is financed by the British government. So they have access on the ground, and that's why we have to use all our capacity to convince the British government to use their influence on these armed groups, which are linked to the al-Nusra, to save the lives of the Syrians. So that was my message, and I'm quite sure that we're going to work on this in the future, well, until there will be full settlement in Syria. Any other questions? Who didn't ask a question? Yeah, please. We are now going in the second term.
Lucy Hoff, LBC. Would you miss England's football team at the World Cup if the decision was taken for them not to go?
Well, as I understand, you know, the football players are coming, and we will be. I like British football, you know. I'm not basically a big fan of the football, but when you see a good play, because everybody enjoys. That's why, you know, we will be happy to see the British, let's say, football players. But as I understand that on the government of at the level of the government, there was a decision of not to go by the officials and some others, you know. But this is the sovereign decision of the country. This is just the fact of life. I see the last row.
Cristina Marconi from the Italian newspaper Il Messaggero. What do you expect from the European summit today? What do you think will be the tone at the end of the day?
It's difficult to expect, to say what I'm expecting. But what I would like to expect is that the British government should present the evidence. And the European countries, the leaders, will make conclusion based on the evidence. Don't take the words of the British for granted. I mean, first, and I'm quoting Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. I think that's exactly what should happen in the European summit. It's a real question.
So the question is, if, looking at the history of political murder, recent political murder in history, the murder of Putin's opponents, if Vladimir Putin was a serial killer, would you, as a diplomat, as a Russian diplomat, would you answer the question honestly?
Listen, it's not a correct question. I'm not going to answer this because, you know, it goes too far. Sorry about that. Not in this house. Respect the ambassador, please, please. No. Respect the ambassador. I'm sorry. I'm not going to answer your question because it goes too far. There should be some kind of good manners. Sorry.
Ambassador, a senior government official has described Russia as a strategic enemy, no longer a strategic partner. Is that correct? Is Russia regarding that kingdom as a strategic enemy? And are you fearful that the European Union is increasingly of that view?
You know, preparing for these press conferences, I decided to have a look at the, let's say, at the National Security Strategy and Strategic Defense and Security Review 2015. That's a great document. And it's written here, this is an official document of the United Kingdom. Russia is considered as the main state-based threat to the security of the United Kingdom and its allies. According to this document, Russia is an aggressive, authoritarian, and nationalist state, defining itself in opposition to the West and willing to undermine wider international standards of cooperation. So this is the official policy of Britain. Then what we see from the speech of Prime Minister Theresa May, she said, and she designated Russia as the main threat to the international order on which the West depends. As she put it, Russia is the chief among those who seek to undermine open economies and free societies. So basically, this will explain you why we have all this anti-Russian campaign today. Because the government is supposed to follow the decision like they taking in official level. So this is the strategy of the UK. And for us, of course, well, we regret. Because we always promoted strong and friendly and equal relations with the absolutely majority of countries in the world. This is Russia's foreign policy priority, which is specifically mentioned by the President Putin in his address in the Federal Assembly, so this is addressed to the nation. United Kingdom is not an exception. Unfortunately, we don't see political will from the British government to sustain normal relations with Russia. Please.
If the British investigators showed you clear evidence that the Russian state was behind the attempted assassination of the Skripals, and that you were then able to verify this, would you resign in outrage? What would you do?
Good question. I think my friend, is laughing. May is the answer to these questions. Let me. I just sent to Secretary Johnson a note today, and I'll just keep 2 minutes and disclose what kind of questions we ask the Foreign Office. At which hospital are Mr. and Mrs. Skripal being treated? We don't have any information. What is their exact diagnosis, condition, and what treatment are they receiving? No information. Is the treatment the same as one provided to Surgeon Nick Bailey? No information. Why has the condition of Mr. Bailey improved while the Mr. and Mrs. Skripal remain in a critical condition? No question. Did Mr. Bailey, Mr. Skripal, or Mrs. Skripal receive antidotes? You know what's the antidotes, I hope. Which antidotes? How had the medical staff identified which antidotes to use? Have the police or the hospital identified the next of kin with whom medical information can be shared and who is entitled to take certain decisions in case Mr. and Mrs. Skripal are unconscious? They are Russian citizens. It's absolutely legitimate questions. Who is the next of kin? Has the person arrived in the UK? We don't have any information. Did Mr. and Mrs. Skripal agree to CCTV footage of their movements in Salisbury on the 4th of March to be shown on the TV? If not, who gave the agreement on their behalf? Is that person entitled to also authorize consular access and or publication of photo, videos that would confirm that Mr. and Mrs. Skripal arrived at the hospital? No information. What protection against the chemical exposure is used by the medical staff? If consular access is impeded by the risk of exposure, can the same protection be used by the consular officer? Is there any legal representative tasked to ensure that the rights of the Mr. and Mrs. Skripal with regard to medical treatment and to the investigation are duly protected? If yes, who has appointed that representative? If no, who is entitled to appoint one? And this is just the beginning. Not a single question, we don't have any answers. So basically, you have a hypothetical question. But before discussing this question with you, I'll be happy to receive the answers to all these questions, and we have at least a few lists of them. So the case is really very serious for us.
One of your questions there was was an antidote used? But earlier you told us, I believe, maybe I mistakenly remember this, you actually said an antidote was used.
Yes, I said this. Because, we understand that, at least based on the, let's say, on the opinion of our specialists, they would say that if this so-called agent A234 was used, the people should die immediately. So it means that either they receive the antidote or something else happened. But we don't know what's the substance, because nobody saw this substance. Nobody had, even the samples of that. That's exactly the problem. But you listened very attentively to my speech. I like it.
So I have another question based on what you said.
Yeah.
To my colleague's question about your Poirot comment.
Of what?
The Poirot tweet.
Poirot. You like it. You like it. You like it. Definitely. Yeah, okay.
But my question is this. You've said that this is not a political statement, that this is for the public, and they like it. Are you trying to intentionally reach out?
No. We have seen the comments. We have seen the comments. That was the basis of my statement. Read the comments. No, read the comments. And the people like it. This is just the.
This is another social media campaign.
No, I don't think so. The very small Russian Twitter compared to all the British media, newspapers, TV channels. What are you talking about? That's not a campaign, just give us the right, just to put something on the Twitter, please. And if you want to write to our Twitter, we'll be happy, just to put something about Poirot maybe, because Poirot was dealing with the most complicated cases in the UK. So some people believe, we need them.
But you pay attention to how people react to it.
Well, of course we are paying attention to everything. This is the job of the embassy. We have to report what the people think, what they're going to do with the Brexit, what will be the future of Britain, what are the statements of the Foreign Office, what Theresa May is saying, in the Parliament, what the MPs are telling us. Because, if you come back to the statement of the MPs, you would remember, you're a very attentive person, In the Parliament, there were people claiming for the cyber attack against Russia. There were at least 10 statements on that. Could you imagine in anybody's parliament in the world that the MPs are calling for cyber attack against the country? That's unbelievable. And by the way, when Boris Johnson, Secretary Johnson, was in Moscow, and Lavrov met him, and they touched the question of the meddling in the British elections, all these things. And of course, Secretary said that, we are worried that you are meddling the elections, the Brexit or something. And then Lavrov said, why don't we have the consultations on the cybersecurity? We put the specialists, they will sit down. If
the reason why it had no answer is because Russia is the prime suspect for the poison. Did you get that, did you?
We're not buying this because first we have to see the evidence and then we have to make the conclusions. If you're a serious part, a serious country, you have to present and back up your accusations. So far, we didn't have any information from the British government, and for us, that's put us in a big question mark. Sorry about that. I'm not going. It's just no. I'm sorry. It's just don't monopolize the floor. I respect all of you, but give the others, please.
Your Excellency, you said earlier that you had no idea about the mandate of the OPCW delegation here. But my question is, if the OPCW confirms the analysis of the British experts, would you be satisfied with that?
I don't know. First, we have to have a full report, to see the full report, and then I could imagine that we are going to ask more questions. Because, we were blamed on a very serious matter. And for us, it's very important to understand all the details and to get the answers to all the questions. And by the way, the OPCW, this is a very right place for the discussions and for the professional dialogue. So far, we have seen just the articles in the British newspapers, which are not backed by any reasonable evidence. So this is the new realities. We want to have a serious conversation with the specialists under the international auspices of the international organization. We're the member of that organization, and Britain is also the member of that organization, and Britain should follow the rules. Otherwise, what's the sense to be the member of the organization? It's just, and by the way, Article 9 of that organization of the Charter of Data Organization specifically puts us to the situation that exists today in the UK. I think we're all almost finished. Please.
Dismiss the allegations as baseless and wild. What do you think Britain stands to gain from blaming Russia? What is the motive, do you think, in driving through such?
You have seen my quoting of the National Security Strategy and Strategic Defense and Security Review. I'm quite sure that you can make your own conclusion. In these papers and in a banquet speech of the Prime Minister, Russia was named as the main enemy. This is just the fact of life. And what we see today is just the follow-up of that papers.
But why do you think that is? What do
You have to ask Secretary Johnson.
I'd like to ask you, what do you think Britain stands to gain?
Well, my personal feeling is that Britain is trying to find its new role in the world. Because after Brexit, they have to see, just to find the new priorities for the foreign policy. And so far we see at least a wish to deter Russia. And probably based on that papers, or as I said, on the national security strategy, so this will be their priority. It's written officially. It was supported by the statement of the Prime Minister. This is just the fact of life, and this is the answer to your question. I think...
In 2015, before the Brexit election.
What?
That strategy was written before the Brexit vote.
Yeah, but the speech was made last November. Sorry about that. That was after the decision. You're very precise, but... You don't like this name?
You talked about, you kind of raised suspicions about Portsmouth Down actually being the source of the nerve agent that actually committed the attack. Is that a signal that Russia might consider some kind of challenge inspection under the OPCW? Is it Article 9 and 10?
That's a good idea, by the way. I like it. So I'll pass this to the Russian ambassador in Hague. So this will be named by you. You speak Russian, great. I think that I have to thank you, all of you. And if there will be any wish to meet me, I'll be happy to do this. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that was Alexander Yakovenko, the Russian ambassador to the United Kingdom, giving a rather extraordinary news conference at the Russian embassy in central London. A few things to point out there. He said that his government have not received any information from the British Foreign Office or police about the investigation in Salisbury. He said that Britain had provided no proof of Russia's alleged involvement in the nerve attack. He also added that the embassy has been refused to consular access to Yulia Skripal, who is a Russian citizen. Let's bring in our diplomatic editor, Dominic Waghorn. A lot to talk about there, Dominic. He's basically explored the idea that it was the British government that was involved in this attack.
Yeah, there were those, amongst them a former British ambassador who said that Alexander Yakovenko should have been expelled along with the 23 diplomats or spies that were thrown out and we saw leave a day or so ago. And the government may regret not throwing him out, I think, after that performance, because he's made some pretty outrageous claims, repeated claims that were made by the Russian Foreign Ministry yesterday, outrageous in the minds of the British government. He's also done a lot, I think, to throw a lot of chaff into the air and thrown up a whole range of conspiracy theories. There's one Russian word that we hear after. We heard after Litvinenko, we heard after the MH17 disaster, when a Russian anti-aircraft missile, whether or not it's fired by Russians, brought down a passenger plane, and other outrages that Russia's accused of, and that's the word maskirovka. It is Russian for disguise, but it's the military doctrine that diplomats, spies, Russian military commanders are trained in, and it's using all the means at your disposal to disguise the reality and to use conspiracy theory, deception, misleading information, the manipulation of public opinion to achieve either your strategic aim or your tactical aim. And Ambassador Yakovenko's critics will say this was a masterclass in maskirovka, because he was throwing out these various red herrings. Russian for that is udna, which is part of that doctrine, His red herring here, which we've heard from other Russians, is that Salisbury is very close to Porton Down, where Britain has its chemical weapons laboratory.
His implication was that the nerve agent was already in the country before this attack.
Well, he's implying that he's just raising a question. Is it a coincidence that this happened just a few miles down the road from Porton Down, where Britain's chemical weapons laboratories are? He's also asking a lot of questions which, at the moment, the British have not answered. The kind of terrorism police haven't answered. They've left open, haven't answered those questions for us either. And he's playing the role of the sort of wounded party. He's a very accomplished diplomat. He's a reasonable-sounding, plausible-sounding diplomat, good at laughing things off. But what he's saying here is repeating what the US State Department said was wild accusations and implausible denials yesterday, the claim that Britain was behind this outrageous attack by a nerve agent that all the experts agree only the Russians have developed, only they possess. And I think most accept that it could only have happened on the command of somebody in the Kremlin, whether that was Putin or a rogue element. It's pretty much unthinkable that anyone else outside the Kremlin could have ordered this. So if you accept the assertion that this was Novichok, and you may not, because you may not believe in British intelligence anymore, British scientists, but if you do, then nearly all the experts draw that line back to the Kremlin. So the question is, he's asking for evidence, as the Kremlin has been asking for. What kind of evidence would please them? I mean, are they looking for a vial that says from Vladimir Putin with love? Are they looking for Russian words on some kind of piece of evidence? If this was the Russians, then it's been done in a way that allows the British to accuse them of it, but without enough evidence to prove it. And that's what the Russian authorities are trying to make the most of, including the ambassador this morning.
OK, Dominic, thank you.
Well, Theresa May's in Brussels for European Council summit, in which she's expected to urge EU leaders to stand shoulder to shoulder with the UK in face of threats from Russia. EU foreign ministers have expressed their unqualified solidarity with Britain, but the Prime Minister will be hoping for a more strongly worded statement that explicitly condemns Russia. The Sky's Europe correspondent Mark Stone is there. Mark's been listening to that extraordinary press conference as well. And Mark, the Russian ambassador said that he's spoken to a number of EU ambassadors. They've not received any information from the UK. First, they want evidence before they form any conclusions. Do you think Theresa May will get the support that she wants?
Well, look, I think the first thing to say is that it's no coincidence that the Russian ambassador has spoken today and just before the meeting here in Brussels gets underway. He knows, and his consular embassy officials would have made that speech available to every embassy, every country around the European Union. So they will be fully abreast of the latest Russian thinking as they go into this meeting here, where Salisbury and Russia has ramped right up to near the top of the agenda here. Forget Brexit for the time being, that's parked. We are talking, and that much of the discussion here today and into the night will be on Russia and on how to deal with it, and specifically on how on a British effort to get unanimous support from the rest of continental Europe and the European Union on what Britain is quite clear was a crime carried out on British soil by Russia. The continental or the European view, or the view of the 27 as individual countries has developed somewhat over the course of the past 2 weeks. Initially, some countries were really quite loose with their language. You certainly couldn't call it a united statement back about 10 days or so ago. Now we have heard much more coordinated language. Mark Sedwell is the British National Security Advisor. He travelled from London here to Brussels yesterday, spent the whole day talking to ambassadors from right across the Union, giving them as much information that he has about why Britain thinks Russia is behind the attack in Salisbury. And it is with that, and presumably with the text of what the ambassador said at the Russian embassy just now, that the leaders here will arrive or have arrived and will coordinate their views. Mark Rutte is the Danish Prime Minister. He spoke to our political advisor Faisal Islam a short time ago and said simply that the wording which we will that they will come as a union to the wording which will say we are fairly and squarely behind Theresa May and her government, and we will put pressure on Russia to come clean. I don't think we can expect late tonight anything in terms of action against Russia. I think this is all about a united form of words, which so British diplomats lead me to believe, if it is united, if it is strong in terms of its wording, then it will be heard by the Kremlin. that remains to be seen whether or not that is true. But I think what Britain is trying to do is demonstrate to its European colleagues that this is part of a clear pattern. Dominic mentioned MH17, Alexander Litvinenko, the annexation of Crimea so MH17, yes, the annexation of Crimea as well is another part of this pattern which Britain says leads them to believe that there is no doubt Russia was behind what happens in Salisbury. We'll get that form of words much later on tonight, and it'll be interesting to see just how strong it is.
Mark, thanks very much for that.